healthcare. And when you think about healthcare, it's healthcare is 1/5 of the U.S. economy, over $4 trillion a year. And so you can imagine that that's a pretty complex supply chain. So what we're going to do with this panel is try to focus a lens on an area of the healthcare supply chain, primarily around cybersecurity and how that can impact resilience and security of the healthcare supply chain. And we'll broaden it out a little bit from there. To do that and take on that daunting task, we have three brave panelists, all deeply experienced in the healthcare space and the supply chain in particular. And let me just, since it's a modest group, let me introduce them. Jessica Wilkerson is Senior Cyber Policy Advisor with All Hazards Readiness Response and Cybersecurity, that's ARC team, for the Center of Devices and Radiologic Health, CDRH, at the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. She also wins the title of most acronyms in any title, so congratulations. As part of ARC, she examines the issues and develops policy related to the safety and efficacy of connected medical devices in an increasingly connected world. Jessica's worked across government with the private sector, bringing her background to mathematics, computer science, law to help solve problems and risks in our health system and the equestrian world. That's a bit of an insight. Chris Van Schijndel is a cybersecurity director for Johnson & Johnson and brings more than 2 decades of cybersecurity risk management experience in areas including supply chain, operational technology, and software security. And he co-chairs the supply chain task group with the health sector co-coordinating Council of Cyber Working Group. And lastly, Rob Suárez is Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for BD, Beckton, Dickerson and Company, a global medical technology company that's advancing the world of health by improving medical discovery, diagnostics, and delivery of care. Rob oversees cybersecurity across the company's product, enterprise IT, and manufacturing systems. He's is dedicated to developing a strong community of practice across the healthcare sector and currently chairs the Cybersecurity Steering Committee for the Medical Device Innovation Consortium and the Cybersecurity Working Group at AdvaMed. So, this panel brings not only deep expertise, but also representation from government and the private sector and the healthcare space in general. So thank you all for taking time and being here. I've got a series of questions that we'll go through to help tease out some of the issues around cybersecurity and medical devices and healthcare in general. We'll take some questions from the audience, then have a quick wrap up. So thank you all very much. The first is a jump ball. We'll see who is interested. What are some of the unique, we've heard about different sectors, and healthcare, like every other sector, is very, very idiosyncratic. What are some of the unique aspects and challenges of managing supply chain in general and cybersecurity in particular in healthcare?
All right, I won the jump ball. Steve, that's a great question. So taking a step back, BD is a global medical technology company like Steve described. We have not just needles and syringes, about 90%, over 90% of needles and syringes come from BD. But also there's about over 200 software-enabled medical technologies. And what is really unique about the supply chain in healthcare is that at the end of the day, when it comes to securing it, we're not just securing data and systems and application and technology. We're actually securing patient safety and also patient privacy for a group of individuals who are perhaps in their most vulnerable states of their lives, when they need medical attention, when they need health care. And patients don't have a choice when they show up at a hospital what type of medical technology they're going to use. There are a number of unique cybersecurity risks that exist to manufacturing and supply chain in general, but I truly feel, regardless of what you look at across all of manufacturing and all of supply chain and distribution, That is truly unique in healthcare.
So I can actually put an example onto Rob's point about the uniqueness. So I think as part of what I do at CDRH, as part of FDA, I actually respond when there's a vulnerability in a medical product, a medical device in particular. It is my job working with others at the FDA to actually figure out what the risks are, what the recommended mitigations are, and what we're going to do about it. And so I have 3 supply chain vulnerabilities that have affected medical technologies that I have responded to in my time at the FDA. I've been there 2.5 years. And one of them in particular, it was interesting. It was the Sven-tooth vulnerabilities, which were in Bluetooth low energy. So just whatever Bluetooth low energy was in, it was exposed. And it was interesting because, there's complexities around supply chain disclosures generally and complexities around disclosure. And the researchers who had found the vulnerability had attempted to do the right thing, right? They went to what they thought was the affected companies and told them. What they did is they told the system on a chip manufacturers. No one told anyone downstream. So anybody who was using a system on a chip had no advance warning before these vulnerabilities were made publicly available that they were coming. And for some in various sectors, this was an issue. It was going to be a problem. For us, because the vulnerabilities could allow for deadlocking a device, crashing a device, or bypassing security features on a device, there was a very real possibility that somebody could use these vulnerabilities to manipulate a device that was implanted in a patient, that was directly connected to a patient, or other things that could directly affect patient treatment. And that ability to directly affect patient safety, I think, puts a different spin on what we have to do with supply chain vulnerabilities and so on.
Trying again. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah. So couldn't agree more. Just to build on what I think both Rob and Jessica said there, that there's also a great diversity in healthcare of the ability of different organizations to respond, right? So healthcare itself is a supply chain and an ecosystem, right? It's very, very diverse. You've got large multinational manufacturing organizations like ours. You've got the public sector, the private sector. You have, right down to small regional clinics and not-for-profits and kind of faith-based organizations, all kinds of, a very broad diversity. So I think that's something else that kind of makes managing the risk especially challenging within healthcare.
Thanks. Jessica, I want to pivot to a specific thing. In our conversations before the panel, I learned a little bit about SBOMs, and that has nothing to do with Ukraine. It is software bill of materials. Can you tell us a little bit about about SBOMs, how they can play a role in the healthcare space in general and helping manage supply chain security and resilience in particular?
There we go. So like Steve said, software bill of materials is I don't even think we can say it's a new concept in cybersecurity. We'll call it a maturing concept in cybersecurity, but it's essentially, and we use this metaphor, and I know I've heard issues with it. You're seeing years and years of trauma here. I can't say certain things, and I can say certain things, but I'm going to say it's a nutrition label for software, and I have just upset someone somewhere. But it's essentially it's a listing of all of the software that a piece of technology contains. And the reason that this is important in healthcare is if we look at historical cybersecurity events that have impacted healthcare, one of the biggest ones, for example, is 2017 WannaCry. So WannaCry is a global ransomware infection, and it's worse than your typical ransomware infection because it's wormed. So it's spreading without manual intervention from computer to computer to computer. For those of you who didn't experience WannaCry, it was horrifying because it started in Eastern Europe and just started making its way across the globe towards the United States, and we were waiting for it to hit the United States healthcare system, and luckily it did not because somebody managed to intervene and shut it off. But in the UK, it pretty much shut down the National Health Service for quite some time. And it actually forced closures of emergency rooms. It forced cancellations of patient treatments. And this connects to SBOM because we knew what the vulnerable component was. The vulnerable component was SMBV1, which you don't need to know what it's one thing in Windows. We knew what it was. But you had to Chris's point, you had everybody in the different hospital environments looking around at their 10,000 different potential medical devices and saying, I have no idea which one of these things contains SMBV1. And because I have no idea which one of these contains SMBV1, there is a very, very limited amount of things that I can do to try to protect myself in advance of WannaCry or something else potentially hitting. This is what SBOM addresses. This essentially says if you are going to give me a piece of technology, if you're going to sell me it, whatever, you are going to give me a list of all of the software that piece of technology contains so that then when some kind of issue happens, I can run a quick search and know, okay, technologies A, B, C are impacted. We need to do something to protect them. And it is becoming more and more critical in all sectors, but in healthcare in particular, because it addresses that use case of knowing where your vulnerabilities are, so knowing what to do to protect them.
So Rob, now that Jessica's laid out the magnitude of this problem, what are healthcare? What is BD doing to protect the healthcare supply chain, in particular?
So there's a couple ways to look at, I think, the situation that Jess described with WannaCry, for example, which is one, when something bad happens, how do we operationalize an effort to go find and remediate these problems? The other one is, as we purchase and make decisions to take on new technology, how do we know that we're making good choices? I actually would use the nutritional label as an example. If I'm at the grocery store, I'm looking at buying some cereal. If I'm a diabetic, I'm going to look at the sugar content, right, of that cereal. And I might not make a decision to not buy that cereal. I might make a decision to just say, what, today I'm going to have one bowl of cereal, by the way. I'm not going to have three. And sometimes buying technology, people like me who run technology across a Fortune 200 company, but also healthcare providers need to make those informed decisions as well of what they're deploying and also the cost and effort that it requires to actually manage this technology in a deployed environment and the types of risks that they're taking on. The other thing, though, is going back to what Chris said earlier, you have varying capabilities depending on the organization you're talking to. And so this is a problem that not only cybersecurity companies need to solve, it's companies like BD that design, develop, manufacture medical technology. And so, we do provide actually software bill of materials today in the form of what's called a security white paper. The problem with that is it's a static document. It is a document and a snapshot at one time, and there's no continuous feed for as software changes over time. So let me put this in perspective. Today, the way vulnerability management happens across any kind of network is there's something that's constantly scanning your devices and finding new vulnerabilities, right? And then deploying updates to it. Software bill of materials really changes the construct of that by saying we don't need to constantly scan the network. And an infusion pump, you're going to scan an infusion pump while it's connected to a patient. It's probably just not going to happen, actually. And so when you have that software bill of materials, you're making more of an upfront and more efficient decision on how to manage risk. But ultimately, there's this last mile issue that, I think the medical device manufacturers and healthcare providers need to collaborate on resolving, which is, great, you have a software bill of materials. Now you have thousands of different medical device manufacturers, and they have hundreds of different products, by the way, and now you need to manage an SBOM for each of those and look it up. And no, there actually needs to be a more automated and efficient way. And I think that's the next leg of the journey. I think we're just starting around the corner of really clear understanding that software bill of materials is necessary and helpful. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more manufacturers come to the table with that. But again, that last mile issue of actually automating it and incorporating it, make it scalable for healthcare providers, I think is really going to be important.
So Chris, we've heard about BD and Rob's views on this. Can you talk a little bit about what J&J is doing in this space as one of a two-part question? The second part is you co-chair an industry group on this. What are healthcare organizations doing to collaborate to better manage cyber risk in the healthcare supply chain?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think in healthcare actually we have a really great and very healthy culture of collaboration and sharing, which I think others, certainly I see in manufacturing and consumer goods and other spaces, I think it's just starting to get going. I know finance is already well ahead, but I think in healthcare, yeah, we do a good job of that on behalf of patients. I think because of that mission that was talked about earlier. So I'll give a couple of examples. Within the healthcare ISAC, so the ISACs are, for those that are not aware, the information analysis sharing centers. That there's work that's recently been done in the supply chain space. So there's a paper out there on their website, which you can Google. It's called Securing the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain. And that gives a really good kind of practitioner's guide as well as kind of a CISO guide to both securing the internal supply chain, right? So our own manufacturing, our own distribution facilities, labs, and so on, operational technology, as well as the external supply chain. So, kind of the third-party risk component. Another example with the task group that I kind of co-chair within the Health Sector Coordinating Council, one of our flagship work products is called HIC-SCRIM, so that's Healthcare Information Cybersecurity SCRIM. And that's a guide that is really designed for the small and medium-sized healthcare organizations, those small regional clinics and smaller providers or smaller, manufacturing organizations and so on. It's based on NIST, right? It's a field deployable toolkit that enables those organizations to, it gives them tools that they can kind of put into practical use to kind of accelerate their ability to mature their supply chain risk management practices. There's kind of contractual language, there's assessment tools, there's a bunch of good stuff. So I'd point to those as examples. But I think that's one of the strengths that we do have in healthcare, that we collaborate very well and we share with each other.
So as I look up across the podium, I can't help but notice that I've got a private sector federal sandwich, and so I want to ask, how can healthcare delivery organizations and medical device makers work together to address supply chain risks and work with government to do that? So I'd love to hear from all three of you on that general topic. And Jessica, let's start with you. And what would help you from industry, and how do you see industry and government working together to solve this problem?
Sure. So I think Chris actually brought up a lot of the points that I would say here, which is that I'm not steeped in other sectors in the way that I am steeped in healthcare, but it is actually kind of amazing to me the amount of voluntary, proactive, collaborative cybersecurity policy development that goes on. The Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council is one of the most active policymaking bodies that I see in a lot of my government work, where there's something like 10 to 12 individual working groups on different topics that are all going forward simultaneously, somewhere between 30 to 50 participants in each one, and we'll spend anywhere from 6 months to, in my case, 2.5 years, developing really robust, comprehensive policy on a given topic. And for us at the FDA, one of the things that's very valuable on this, and Rob actually worked with a colleague of mine, Afton, on a medical device cybersecurity best practices document that is now seen as incredibly important and influential. And it becomes a virtuous feedback cycle where you have this collaborative policy development that's happening within the Health Sector Coordinating Council and other such bodies that then informs and feeds FDA's regulatory policymaking, that then goes back into the conversations that are happening in the industry, and so on and so forth. And so I think, really to the credit of the industry, we have seen this cycle start and not only become self-sustaining, but become almost something that speeds up as it goes along. I think one thing that I would highlight, that I would say is, the Food and Drug Administration, I'm going to compliment myself and my agency. Like we punch way above our weight when it comes to cybersecurity, specifically the devices branch. But healthcare is an incredibly diverse space, and I think one need that I do see is for other parts of the federal government, regulatory space, and other areas of healthcare to get involved. So we need more of the regulators in the room on hospital cybersecurity and some of these other things that, for example, we occasionally have some very enterprising folks come to us and ask FDA to do something on hospital cybersecurity, which we can't because we have no jurisdiction. So that is one area of growth that I do see.
Rob, Chris, any additions to that?
So, what Jess described, she touched on medical device cybersecurity. So the medical technology that you're purchasing, using, maybe connecting to a patient, maybe placing in a lab. But there's also this, and that's really important, by the way, absolutely. Like I helped write this thing with Jess's colleague called the Joint Security Plan. The Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, I will echo that again, like amazing organization to get involved with, to stay connected and share information. They have a lot of resources on medical device cybersecurity that you can utilize today. The other thing that Chris referred to as well is really the other components of supply chain in medical technology, manufacturing and distribution centers. Now, on medical devices, you can have healthcare providers, you can even have patient advocacy groups talk about, hey, we need more secure medical devices. I'm holding this medical device in my hand. I got this infusion pump right next to me, and it needs to be more secure. But when we talk about manufacturing distribution centers, healthcare providers, patients, they might never see that. And the really interesting thing about, and maybe another unique thing about that aspect of the supply chain, manufacturing distribution centers, is that they can be really, really old. They can have manufacturing sites where communities have been built around them with pathways running through them, by the way, because it's part of the community, right? But at the same time, tremendous amounts of cybersecurity risks in these environments. We talk about healthcare, hospitals having older equipment, older devices. Well, manufacturing has old devices as well, and they work perfectly fine. But at one point in time, someone said, hey, let's get some data off of that. Let's connect the sensor over here and measure this over there, and let's see if we can improve quality. There's tremendous benefits to connecting and digitalizing your manufacturing and supply chain, because in one hand, it actually improves your quality, improves your resilience, but in the other hand, it actually introduces some cybersecurity risk as well. And again, this is an area where I think Chris described their program for manufacturing and distribution centers and securing those types of environments. Certainly, BD, we're doing the same thing as well, but it's a significant undertaking. Again, because you're looking at technology that does the job just fine, and at the same time, you're trying to make sure it's still going to be resilient into the future.
There's a great parallel there. So, with med devices, right? So, in the same way as the medical device manufacturing organizations, there's an onus on us to, architect and secure our stuff, in a way that's going to be resilient into the future. I think OT OEMs, right? So, operational technology OEMs, those that are providing the operational technology that's doing the manufacturing, the conveyor systems within the distribution centers and so on. These are capital investments that run way beyond the useful lifespan of that investment. The depreciation cycle, right, for that investment is way beyond the 5 years or so that the software component of it is supposed to last, right? So I think that there's a role there for OEMs to really kind of step up and work at how they architect their solutions in a way that's more modular and that enables us to, switch out the software components without, needing to write off the whole investment of the broader equipment set.
So I want to take this in a little bit different and maybe more even more forward-looking direction. And that is, when I'm listening to the conversation, we're talking a lot about medical devices, medical device interconnectivity. But what about when the medical device is software? So increasingly, we're moving to where software is the diagnostic tool and even the treatment. And so what cybersecurity risks in the future do you see as we move into that world?
I've learned that if I give it a few seconds, it actually starts to work before I start talking. So, I think that it's certainly a case, right? We actually have a term for this in the medical device world, which is SAMD, software as a medical device. There's also SIMD, software in a medical device. So it becomes part of the lexicon and part of the way that we talk about these things. But so it's interesting from the FDA cybersecurity perspective. The way that we have started approaching these issues is whether you have let's call it a dumb device, there is no connection. Whether you have a device that has minimal connectivity or minimal cybersecurity capabilities, let's say there's no internet connectivity, but there's software in the device doing something. Then you connect it to the internet. Then you have even greater capabilities, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, highly distributed environments, or whatever the case may be. We have spent some time thinking about this and in trying to capture, from a cybersecurity perspective, is there something meaningfully different or meaningfully unique about, for example, software as a medical device versus just a medical device in the more traditional sense, or a medical device that incorporates all kinds of things, where you've got software as a medical device as part of it, but then it's got a physical device component. Maybe something happens in the cloud. Maybe there's an AI/ML algorithm running in the background that's also part of it. And what we have generally concluded, or certainly this is the conversations we're having, is the cybersecurity concerns of that doesn't change. The concerns are always, is it available when it needs to be available? Does it keep confidential what it needs to keep confidential? And can you trust the integrity of whatever it's doing? So is it going to deliver the treatment that it's going to deliver safely, effectively, in the way that it's designed to, in the way that it's needed to, and so on? And whether or not those capabilities are being delivered by a traditional device, a software as a medical device that's distributed, cloud, AI/ML, that is almost more of a design decision than it is a cybersecurity issue. I actually don't know if you guys would agree with that, but I think that's how we're starting to think about it, is we don't want to start bucketing things into special categories from a cybersecurity perspective of AI/ML has somehow special cybersecurity concerns and cloud has different concerns, because certainly, especially as you start having these systems integrate multiple of these different features, the overarching concern is the cybersecurity as a system as a whole, not of the individual pieces.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I think that there's a tendency to kind of fascinate onto the latest shiny thing, right? Especially maybe it's kind of driven in part by the media, right? We have, there's some 0 day, some kind of earth melting vulnerability that's going to send us all back to the Stone Age. But a lot of the response really comes down to the basics of like defense in depth. It's the same old in terms of how we really mitigate against these things. So yeah, I totally agree. I think we shouldn't fascinate on the new, but look to apply or fit it in. See where it fits into existing kind of tried and tested patterns.
I'm going to disagree. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's absolutely true. Actually, these classifications and categorizations are great for consultants, but when it comes to like solving the problem, the reality is that whether it's software as a medical device or it's a hardware-based medical device, it has technology, it has software, it's going to have vulnerabilities because humans are fallible, humans make mistakes, and just like the human body develops aches and pains over time, software develops vulnerabilities. That is a reality regardless of whether or not it's software or hardware. I would say this, by the way, you can maybe have a philosophical debate to say software as a medical device will not have hardware level vulnerabilities, by the way. That's something else that we don't talk a lot about. Sometimes the hardware itself that's used for medical technology is vulnerable in certain ways. Well, but at the same time, when you have software as a medical device, you're going to have broader proliferation of that software as well. Like you're just going to have more of it because it's as easy to download as a mobile app on your smartphone. So it's just, I think it needs to be treated the same with the same level of high degree of rigor when it comes to security.
One thing that I will add, and this may get to the heart of your question, however, I will say, you know, to a certain extent, I think even this is a stretch and may make some people in the room laugh. Like, we sort of know what to do from a cybersecurity perspective for what you might term traditional systems. We might not be good at doing it, but we sort of know what we should be doing. What it means to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability in a cloud environment, or what it means to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an AI/ML algorithm are probably going to be radically different than traditional cybersecurity concepts, and we do need to figure out what that means. We just can't, to Chris's point, lose sight of the fact that it's all in the service of cybersecurity. It's a new and great technology, but we're still aiming at the same goal.
And also just to add on to that, software as a medical device, you're talking about patients, direct to patients, right? Like, you know, my parents, they don't have a full-time staff of IT like a hospital, right? If you have an infusion pump or dispensing cabinet and there's an issue with that, you call up, you know, a department to go help you fix it, right? Now, I'm that department actually for my parents. But so you need to actually design the product in a way consistent, you know, with the way its user experience design is. The security features components of it also need to be easy to use, almost seamless for user, again, because it's just a different experience.
All right. So, you know, we talked a little bit in an earlier panel about chip manufacturing. What semiconductor shortage problems do you see in the healthcare supply chain and in the worldwide economy? And are there any unique risks in healthcare related to that?
I don't know about you, because I think that's a little bit outside our wheelhouse, but maybe what I did take away actually from that other the other panel on semiconductors, or maybe it's the transportation one. It was the discussion that they had around the use of AI and ML. That to me definitely resonated as something that we can something that I think we need to do more of in healthcare, actually across supply chain risk management, right? If you look at how we do a lot of our supply chain risk management today, right, the process, in terms of the processes, right, it's all very much based on kind of questionnaires and gathering data and things that really don't scale very well, right? If you think about like the supplier life cycle, right, how we onboard a supplier through, to the end of the offboarding the supplier, typically we'll start by, onboarding a supplier. Business wants to do business with this new supplier. We're going to do some basic triage questions, right? And so there's a human being that's going to make some decisions around, well, what kind of data are we talking about and how connected are they going to be? And it's going to come up with some sense of risk, right? And you can do that for hundreds or maybe even thousands of suppliers, but you can't do that accurately and consistently for tens of thousands of suppliers, right? So I think when it comes to that's the opportunity that AI or machine learning, machine learning better put, really gives us is to start doing that analysis at scale, to build some predictive models based on our data, right, based on the data that's already there within our procurement systems, within our ERP systems, to say, what does a risky supplier look like for this organization, to do that continuously as well, right? Because a lot of these questionnaires are just kind of point in time, right? And also when it comes to response, right, to be able to say, okay, so something went wrong at a supplier, right? Because our ability to predict, based on questionnaire-driven assessments, right, our ability to predict which suppliers are actually going to get hit, I don't think is particularly good, across sectors, right? Something went wrong at supplier X, but I have the data within my ERP systems to know that this customer, this order, this product is now, going to get hit, or is going to have an impact due to that supplier outage, and that's going to help us mobilize faster to reduce the impact by being able to respond faster and put other mitigations in from a business perspective. So, yeah, some thoughts there.
So I don't know that I have too many thoughts on the semiconductor shortage, just because I haven't spent a lot of time with that in the medical device space, but I can make an analogy to the general software supply chain within medical devices, where one of the things that we're discovering with medical devices, I think this is probably true across the board, but it has been a very Wild West free-for-all in software development for a long time, where it's just like, put whatever software you want in there, that, it's a resource that never runs out. Pull down whatever software libraries from GitHub or whatever you want. You couldn't solve a problem? Stack Overflow will probably tell you how to solve it. Just stick whatever it says right in there. In one, there's a whole bunch of concerns with quality control and other things that we've seen with that. The other thing and this made it into for those of you who are familiar with FDA's guidance process, it's very important, and a lot of people follow it very closely. We just released back in April our pre-market cybersecurity guidance, and in that we introduced for the first time, at least explicitly within the guidance, the idea of source code escrow. Essentially saying, if you're going to put software in your medical device, it would be good to consider pulling down a copy of the source code, so that if something happens to that source code in the future, the manufacturer goes out of business, the software disappears, it is irretrievably compromised in some way, you have an ability to essentially rescue that software, resuscitate that software, so that it doesn't have downstream effects on your medical device's ability to operate. And the reason that I tie this into the semiconductor shortage to an extent is the other thing that we've seen is that sometimes there are software that has a particular capability that everybody needs or wants. And there's only really one piece of software that does it, or everybody only uses supplier A for that capability. And they haven't thought what would happen if supplier A's capability suddenly went away. And so, we've also started introducing and talking to folks about this concept of, okay, if supplier A's software becomes irretrievably broken or vulnerable or whatever it is, you need to be able to replace that with something else. So think about what the software replacement is for that capability in your device. And it's not something that we've really thought about before, but it's not because of a shortage. There's no software shortage, but it's a similar concept in this preparedness aspect of, essentially, if something happens to the supply chain, what do you do?
So that actually makes me think of my second to last question, which is intended to make everybody uncomfortable, because I have tremendous experts in cybersecurity and healthcare in that space. So I'm going to ask you to stretch beyond your area of deep expertise, and from the perspective of strategic global competition, what threats do you see, political, military, environmental, economic, not only in terms of chip manufacturing, but pharmaceutical precursors and other areas of the healthcare supply chain? What would keep you up at night, and any thoughts on that? You knew I would ask this, right? Nobody wants me to ask that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us, actually, on this one, which is a patient being harmed. At the end of the day, it's why we work in healthcare. We want to help people get healthy, and when you have software and you have healthcare and medical technology that is supporting a patient's health, and you have cyber vulnerabilities, then you have cyber safety risk. You have patient safety risk, and that is, I think, a situation that I think is certainly something that that can keep you up at night. Otherwise, I sleep pretty good.
So the example that I would give, sort of meshing together a couple of things. So I'd mentioned WannaCry. In I think only a month later, there was another, what we all thought was a ransomware attack, but it actually turned out to be a wiperware attack, where it just erases your system, which was NotPetya. And NotPetya hit a couple of companies. It was very bad. I think it was hundreds of millions or hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage at the end of the day. But the one that it hit that was concerned in the medical space was Merck. And I remember at the time I was still with the United States Energy and Commerce Committee, and we wrote a letter, which I think is public, essentially, because there was speculation at the time that NotPetya had impacted Merck's ability to develop vaccines, because it had essentially wiped the manufacturing equipment, and they did not have replacements. That turned out not to be the case. That was conflation of separate issues, so that was great. But if you look at NotPetya, and again, this was speculation. I don't know how much of this has been confirmed by intelligence since then, but Merck was a byproduct. It was collateral damage of a Russian action against Ukraine. Russia was trying to do something to Ukraine, I think back in, well, I guess it must have been 2017, attacked a Ukrainian tax company software. And because like one computer in the entirety of Merck's corporate network had this software installed, they got hit. They were not the intended target. They got hit anyway. And the potential for severe damage and disruption to the healthcare sector then became a very real possibility. Not because it was targeted, not because anybody was coming after it, but just because the ubiquity, the proliferation, and the shared supply chains between all of these different companies created the environment for that. So one, my biggest fear is collateral damage of military action, especially as cyberspace becomes more and more seen as a military domain. And then of course we're getting more and more to the thing where cyberspace is now seen as a legitimate target. And so if you're going to have people targeting cyberspace, I don't think we understand cyberspace enough to have targeted cyber actions. I think you are always going to have a much larger blast radius than you intended.
To build on that a little bit, so yeah, I think that there's an increasing amount of uncertainty, right, in the world. It feels like we're becoming less globalized, that there's things happening that we didn't expect 12 months ago, 18 months ago, 5 years ago, and these things come to pass, if it's COVID, if it's international conflicts, whatever it happens to be. So I think understanding, having the data to understand the ramifications of any future event and what that means for our supply chain so that we can, respond and react accordingly is really key. And I think one of the key challenges we continue to have, again, across sectors, healthcare and beyond, is just the opaque nature of the supply chain after the first tier, right? So the suppliers of the suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers, and where do all of these nodes converge? And then you have the overlay of some geopolitical crisis or some prolific ransomware event or wiperware event or wherever it happens to be, right? Unless you have that understanding of that data, it becomes very hard to manage the risk and to respond to it. So I'd say that is a key challenge that hopefully we can, with technology, with AI and ML, we can start to address in time, such that we can be more prepared for whatever comes further down the line.
And who would have thought it was the healthcare panel that would talk about S-bombs and collateral damage? So now let me turn to the audience. Are there any questions from the present or virtual audience? Well, he's got the mic, and then we'll go to you.
Oh, not a green light. It's a red light. Red. The dead battery. Here, be still, my face, man. Here you go. Okay. All right. Here's what happened. I had a arterial valve replaced. Okay. And then there was a problem, so they put in a pacemaker. That's fine. It's a lab in Rochester, Minnesota. So you already know the name of the lab. Okay. That was in December. January, February, go back to my cardiologist, and the first thing she says, or the pacemaker doctor, she says, "Why haven't you turned on the automated transmission device next to your bed that is supposed to transmit untoward events in my pacemaker, which has a 10 to 12 year battery?" I wish my phone did. Anyway, That having been said, I said, what? And so we went through the thing, and I said, no, it's been turned on since I got home back in December. She said, well, I don't know what happened. So I go home, and there's a phone number on the top of the device. So I call the phone number, and I get this very nice Hispanic person from Puerto Rico, okay, who says, no, we're not getting any transmission from your device. And so turn it off, turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on. And he says, let me see. Who are you? What is your name? Yada, yada, yada. And somebody, when they gave me the pacemaker device that would transmit back to where it's supposed to go, wrote the wrong serial number. Okay. So I said, I'm not dead. What the hell? Okay. So we got it connected. That's fine. I said, but I'm not going to let this go. All right. So I call Abbott Labs. Okay. Probably shouldn't have said the name. So I call Abbott Labs, and they go, we'll call you back. And so somebody from Abbott Labs, who happened to have a JD after his name, which is, I guess, is sort of a junior with a D on it, right? A lawyer called me back, and she said, what happened? I went through the whole thing. And they didn't know that my device was not being transmitting to them, to, I think it's Rochester, Minnesota, and then, or it's Rochester, New York, whichever one. And then from there to my pacemaker doctor, and then to the cardiologist. The problem was nobody knew it wasn't working. And so I said to them, don't you think you should have known it wasn't working? Like at the end of first week, if you don't get any reports, my doctor calls the upstream doctor, who calls the upstream doctor, who then follows all the way through. Now, it all worked fine, supposedly, you know. But still, I think that's another issue in this whole thing. When you have these Wi-Fi or Blu-ray or whatever the hell they are, and I know what they are, devices hooked up, and there's no process follow through. That's almost as bad as the damn thing not working at all. Because they never would have known, because it didn't get reported, that something untoward was happening. So
I'm not sure that that's as much supply chain as, but Rob, do you have some thoughts on that?
If anyone from Abbott's here, they're going to have to file a complaint. No, I'm just kidding. But
not acknowledge it. I called all the doctors. I said them all big things, right? So I said them all big things. They went, oh my God. The cardiologist had retrained his folks. The pacemaker guy retrained his folks. The person who replaced the aortic valve replaced his folks. But I have no idea what Abbott did or didn't. Not acknowledge. That's the problem.
All right, thanks. Rob?
So thank you so much for sharing your story there, and I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through all that. But I'll tell you this, I mean, this is what I say is the mission of cybersecurity in healthcare and medical technology in the midst of the pandemic. What I do in securing medical technology is not about security. It's actually about building trust. It's about building trust with patients, again, who have no choice of what medical technology they're going to have to use and rely on. And the story that you described, again, is really important example of how, when you were talking about consumer-facing medical technology, the use cases, the cybersecurity risks are very unique and need to be handled and designed in terms of mitigations very differently than, say, a hospital grade, medical technology, industrial grade medical technology. I think at some point we'll achieve convergence actually between the two. But anyways, very unique use case there.
Yeah, the communication coordination of all the technology, that's another symposium or two. Is there another question from the audience?
There was one from online, and I'll read it verbatim. Is the cavalry coming from government or private sector?
Is this from Josh Corbin?
Probably.
I'm sorry, repeat the question. I got caught up in my own joke.
Is the cavalry coming from government or private sector?
I don't think it's an either or. I think it is a both, and I think it has to be a both because there are certain capabilities that can only be enforced by the government, right? You know, the FDA is the medical device regulator, has the ability to keep medical devices that are not appropriately cyber secure from being introduced into healthcare environments. We need to do that. We need to do that successfully. You know, but then the medical device manufacturers have an obligation to make secure devices. Hospitals have an obligation to deploy them and maintain them in a secure way. But we also need others from, you know, even the, well, you can call it the hacker community, the security research community, the patient community, to be helping us fill in the gaps of things that we might not be able to see or we might not be in the best position to respond to. In order to give us the information we need to make the best decisions possible. So I think it's in all of the above.
And as we're out of time, that's a great, I think Jessica summed it up for all of us. I want to thank the panel, thank the audience.